Hey there. Um, well, I want to talk for a minute about vision um, and service. Uh, Topic keeps coming up in my feed. In general, it keeps coming up. But, reasonable service uh, in Romans 12, if you say it's anything other than presenting yourself to God, you're already twisting the word and adulterating it. There's nothing further to say to you because you're taking that verse which says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present yourselves as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable, which is your reasonable service, and be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may approve that which is good and acceptable and holy, the will of God. The reasonable service, he tells you right there what it is. It's that you present yourself, period, as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable. It's not that you present yourself to be holy. It's not that you present yourself in order to be acceptable. It's that you present yourself holy and acceptable. And the only way to do that is to have a vision of what Christ has accomplished. And who are you presenting yourself to? You're presenting yourself to God himself as a living sacrifice, which Petra just did a study of it. I was watching her video, but my intuition was that it related to the tabernacle, but it turns out that it is a priestly service related to the tabernacle. Man, my hair is funky today. I just got up. The tabernacle, the word service there is the same as the priest's service in the tabernacle, except we know from Hebrews that as long as the holy place stood with all its services, it shows that the way into the holiest has not yet been made manifest, and we have access to the holiest. But how do we get in there? Only by Christ. He is our way into the presence within the veil. His flesh became a new and living way. He is the way, and he's the altar. So when we present ourselves as a living sacrifice, we're presenting ourselves on the altar, which was out in the outer court. It's where the sacrifices and the gifts were offered, right? And that altar makes the gifts holy because the altar was sanctified with the blood of the burnt offering. And we present ourselves on that altar, which is actually Christ himself, and we're accepted to God and holy because of the altar we're presenting ourselves on. And that altar, being Christ himself, brings us into the presence within the veil because it is Christ and he is our new and living way. So to present ourselves there is our reasonable service. And what are we doing? We're presenting ourselves to the living God. This is what it means to serve the living God. Hebrews talks about how the blood of Christ, who offered himself through the eternal Spirit, will purge your conscience from dead works to serve the living God. To serve the living God is to be in the holiest where God is. And to be in dead works is to be in the holy place where the priests were. And Hebrews again says that as long as the holy place stood with all the priestly service, that showed that the way into the holiest was not yet made manifest. Well, how do we get into the holiest then? The only way is to present ourselves as a living sacrifice on the altar, which means identification with Christ. In our union with Christ. And it's reasonable to do so, meaning that it is a reasoned out service. It's based on what we understand of the person and work of Christ and everything Paul said in the previous chapters about our identification with Christ. In his death, we were buried with him in baptism into his death, and we were made alive together with him. But the way we live is not by us doing something, it's by God doing something. Romans 6 tells us that we present our members to God as instruments of righteousness, and we were buried with him in baptism into his death, so that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, we should walk in newness of life. How? By God raising us up. And then Romans 7 says we died to the law through the body of Christ, that we may be joined to another, even him who was raised from the dead, that we may bear fruit to God. Who's the one doing the work? It's Christ who's raised from the dead and bearing the fruit. That's what it means to serve in newness of the letter, not newness of the spirit, not oldness of the letter. And then in Romans 8, it says, if Christ is in you, though the body is dead because of sin, the spirit is life because of righteousness. And if the spirit of him who raised Christ from the dead dwells in your mortal body, then he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal body through his spirit that dwells in you. Again, who's doing the work? It's God, the Spirit of life, operating in you to give life to you. So again, we say that the next person to move is God. What is our job? It's called a reasonable service, to present ourselves to him. And this is consistent all the way from Romans 6 to Romans 12. To present ourselves to him as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable, means that and it's a reasonable service, means I recognize that I'm on the altar. I'm one with Christ in his death, and yet I'm a living sacrifice. But that life is not me. My body's dead because of sin. He condemned sin in his flesh, and I was baptized into his death. He died to sin once and for all, and his death is my death. And that's my position. I'm growing in the likeness of his death, according to Romans 6, or I've been planted in the likeness of his death, depending on how you translate that word. And I shall also be in the likeness of his resurrection. It's his resurrection. See, what these people who deny this want to do, like Crystal Save Sinner just did a post that was just absolutely ridiculous. They want to say that we are risen apart from Christ. It's not Christ's action. It's you going out and doing things. No, we present ourselves to God as our reasonable service. That is our service. What is your service? It is to present yourself to God, and it's a priestly service. We are the offering in a sense. Christ is the offering, but we are offered in him. And we're holy and acceptable because of him. And this is our reasonable service, and we present ourselves to him. And we're brought into the holiest where God is. And everything is there. The hidden manna is there for us to enjoy. The pasture is there. The rest is there. The inheritance is there. The spirit is there. The life is there. The resurrection is there. This is the Sabbath. This is the reality of what we've been brought into and given access to. And we are told all through Hebrews to come near with boldness. We're told to draw near, not go out, but to come in. And so when people tell you that Romans 12:1 is about getting to work for God, they are completely denying the whole thing that, number one, the verse even says. But number two, they just show they do not understand spiritual things at all. They don't believe that serving God has any value in itself. There is no value to the priesthood. Peter says that we come to him. He was the stone that was rejected of men, and we come to him as living stones and are built up as a holy priesthood to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God. Well, what is that? That's coming to God through Jesus Christ. And what are the spiritual sacrifices? We are just presenting ourselves to him to be a habitation of God in spirit, and he is satisfied. This is his rest. See, you Save Sinner went on about how in her post, it was terrible, and I don't recommend reading it, but she's like, some people are just laboring to get into rest, and they put all this burden on themselves to rest. It's not our rest, it's God's rest. You don't care about what God wants at all. You have no vision. All you are is offended, and so you're just going to rail against anything we teach with no purpose. You are boxing against the air. she was saying, anybody who tells you that you can't do your reasonable service, you need to run from them. And and anyway, it doesn't matter. It was irritating to wake up. Someone sent me the post. I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is just ridiculous. Making a fool out of yourself, Crystal. You really are. Uh, because that verse clearly tells us that our reasonable service is to present ourselves and be renewed in the spirit of our mind and not conform to this world. And I talked about that in the last message, but to be conformed to this world is to have the world's view of what everything means. Whereas to be transformed by the renewing of our mind is to take on God's view. And see, God is interested in his rest. That's what he's building, and that's what the service is for. It's God's habitation in spirit. And people don't, the people, the service mongers, they don't care about God's rest. They care about getting a treat. They're dogs. They work for treats. They work for wages. They're hirelings. And they don't care about the sheep or the pasture or the rest. They don't care about anything that God cares about. And it's like this. They are, my dogs, I'm a terrible dog owner because I spoiled them and I thought, oh, I'll teach them to go outside to potty. And the way I'll do it is every time they go outside, I'll give them a treat. Well, now they've learned that every time they go outside, they get a treat, and I keep indulging them. So you know what they do? They go outside all the time. They go to the door, and I go, oh, well, maybe they want to go potty. And they go outside, and then they want to come right back in. Why? Did they go potty? No. They want a treat, and they think that I'm going to give them a treat for going outside and coming back in because they've learned that if I open the door and they go outside and then I close the door and then they knock on the door and I open the door and they come back in, they should get a treat. They've totally misinterpreted the whole thing because they're driven by their appetites. And that's how most people who serve God work. That's why Paul said they are enemies of the cross of Christ. Their God is their appetites and they glory in their shame, and their shame is their religious flesh. In Philippians 3, they are dogs, they're evil workers. He says, beware the dogs, beware the evil workers. The dog is the perfect analogy because, and he calls all the religious service and the glory of the flesh, circumcised the 8th day and of the tribe of Benjamin, and as to the righteousness of the law found blameless, all that stuff, he calls it, I thought it was dog shit. It's not, it's dog food. He calls it dog food. That's interesting. Why? Because dogs want treats. And this is how they interpret everything in the light of when it comes to spiritual things. They don't care what God wants. They're just trying to figure out what combination of things they can do to get a treat. And that's why they motivate with the carrot and the stick. And that's why they talk about these things like that. Mary, the woman with the alabaster box, there was a song called Why This Waste, and it was a gospel track called Why This Waste. Jesus said that when she poured out that she broke the alabaster box so that the perfume could be poured on him, and Judas was offended, and Judas said, well, this could have been given to the poor. Judas didn't care about the poor. He held the money bag and he was greedy. And it turns out, and I've talked about this, that they were having dinner at Simon the leper's house, who turns out to be Judas's dad. I learned that when we passed through the Gospel of John, that was Judas's dad's house that they were all having dinner at. Simon the leper, who had been healed. He was so excited he invited everybody over. Judas is there. Mary comes and she opens this alabaster box, or breaks it, and pours out the perfume on Christ, and as a service of love. And in Judas's mind, it's a waste, and he says this could have been given to the poor. He's offended by what she did, this extravagant pouring out of something valuable on Jesus and Jesus allowing it to happen. And Judas was so offended that he left at that moment. He left his dad's house and he left all the dinner guests over there, which would have been awkward, and went to the temple and said to the priests, "How much will you give me for Jesus?" That's when he betrayed Jesus. He was offended at legitimate love service towards God. What was she doing? What she was doing was a picture of the incense altar in the holiest, and it was to him a complete waste. Uh, Now, what was he really motivated by? His appetite and his greed. He hated. There was something about that fragrance that filled the room, and that alabaster box was worth a lot. Apparently, it could have supplied his dad's needs, their needs, you know, and the whole situation just offended him that she wasted all that on Jesus. And Jesus said, "She does this for my burial," which totally doesn't make sense to the natural man at all. What are you talking about? Well, she's got a revelation. She's got a vision of the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ already. She's the only one who had an insight into it, even though he told them so many times they couldn't receive it. She got it. And to him, Jesus said, whenever the gospel is preached, this story will be told as a memorial, which is really interesting. That's how important this service was. This is the reasonable service that she offered him. The most costly thing, this fragrance from this perfume that was so expensive that could have been used in service in a practical way, in the eyes of a religious person, to feed the poor or to supply the needs or to take care of business or to do something reasonable for God, supposedly. It was all poured out on Jesus, and in his mind that is a waste. And that's what these people are saying. When we say the reasonable service is to present yourself to God, they say, this is a waste. This is a waste. They don't understand the priesthood. They don't understand the rest. They don't understand the pasture. They don't understand the shepherd. They don't understand God's rest. They don't understand our inheritance. They don't know Christ. That's why they rail. And to them, that verse, present yourself to God as a reasonable service, present yourself to God as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable, which is your reasonable service of worship. To them, the only words that they see are reasonable service. And in fact, they skip reasonable and they say service. And then they backtrack and say, well, what's reasonable? Oh, holy. Well, you need to be holy. That's how they read it. They see the word service, which to them means work, and then they reason that holiness is the work, and so they talk about pursuing your own holiness according to the law. They do. And they take it out of context and manipulate and twist it. And the reason they do that is because they are dogs and they're led by their appetites. They have no concept of what Paul's actually saying in the verses there. They have literally no clue, just like my dogs have no idea that I was trying to train them to learn to pee outside. All they know is that if I open that door and they go outside and they come back in, they might get a treat. And that's why these people who try to twist this verse always want to talk about rewards, because that's what motivates them. And so someone was telling me, you always talk about how we're not supposed to do anything. And I think that's false teaching, And it's like, no, you're missing the point. I'm not saying we're not supposed to do anything, but everything I say we're supposed to do, you consider to be a waste. You don't appreciate when, in fact, the people who enter into rest and into this reality are doing way more than the people who are barking all the time about how we need to be doing something. The people who are always talking about how we need to be doing something aren't doing a dang thing. They're not doing anything other than barking about how we need to be doing something. They are in the holy place, veiled. Okay, they are not enjoying Christ at all. They don't even know what that means, and that's part of the problem. That's why they eventually got offended, because they didn't understand the spirituality of what we were talking about. They picked up the language and coined it because they wanted to be accepted in this community, and they wanted to be close to someone they considered articulate. And when they found out that that person wasn't their buddy, they got offended, and then they repudiated everything that they were supposedly enjoying and went out and ran with wolves, because now they can find another group that they can run with, But they can change their teaching like that because they don't believe any of the things they actually say. They don't understand any of the things they're talking about. And that's what's happened with these people that have gone out from us. They were not of us. They did not believe these things. They did not understand, and they still don't. But when people hear us talk about what is the real service, to them, it's a complete waste. Alabaster box, fragrance. What are you talking about? She gave up something valuable, and the song I was thinking about says, Mary, what was it? Mary offered her love offering. To many such love was a waste. Many treasures and heart futures too. I can't remember, but basically there's a lot of people who you would just look at their lives and say, what a waste. That person is so talented. They should be doing this and that, this and that. And yet they've given themselves completely to the Lord. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob dwelt in tents when Babel was being built. Shouldn't they have gone into Babel and preached the gospel to them? Abraham had the gospel. Didn't he care about the dying world? That divisive person going out and living in a tent? Or, Moses refusing to be called a prince in Egypt. He'd rather suffer affliction with the people of God in the wilderness. Divisive. The world is in Egypt. We're here to win the world to the lost. Okay, these people who say those kind of things, who say, what a waste, your service to God, as you offer yourself up to him and, quote, don't do anything. When, what did Moses go out to do? Well, he said, my people are, Jehovah told him, my people are coming out to a feast. That's what Moses was told to tell Pharaoh. Release my people so they can have a feast to me. And Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob went out to a land that they knew not, because they were promised a land flowing with milk and honey to enjoy as an inheritance. We are going out to enjoy our inheritance. We're going out to enjoy the feast. In fact, Jesus said at the end, the message would be, all things are ready, come to the feast. And the people, especially the people who were invited to the kingdom, would make light of the feast and would say, I'm too busy, and would also beat the servants. And that's what we're seeing. They don't want the feast, and it's going to make the Lord angry. They were invited, but they don't want to go. That's the hardening of this branch that's going to be cut off. And so he's going to go invite all the people during the tribulation that these people wouldn't want at the feast. He's going to not invite the good and the bad, and bring in a great dragnet of people that will be sorted out later, but so that the house can be full. He's not going to have an empty feast just because you don't want to go and you think it's a big waste. You think Judas was a liar and a hypocrite, and he was serving his own appetites, and he was jealous and offended, and that's what really motivated him. And he got so offended, he left his dad's house and he left everybody over there and went and betrayed Jesus, because he's like, well, if he's going to waste all that money there and call that service, I'll go to the priests. They know what service is, and we'll see how much money they'll give me. And that's what these people do. They're hirelings. They work for a wage. And that's why they talk all the time about rewards, because that's their treat. That's their dog treat. And you know what? The things they say are dog food, and the reason they say them is because they are dogs. All right, I need to wake up. I need to take care of a couple things here, and I'll do some teaching later. See ya.